social login, or also known as OAuth. What is it? How can you implement it in Next.js? Well, today we're going to go over just a conceptual overview of social login. We're going to go over some of the benefits and kind of what it is just conceptually first. But then we're going to head over to VS Code and we're actually going to implement social login within Next.js. And I will have this project linked down below, my GitHub project as well. And we are at the Supabase docs right now, as Supabase is a really cool platform that is basically like a backend as a service. And you can also do authentication and all that stuff with Supabase as well. I have a few videos on it, and I've really enjoyed working with Supabase. So we're just at their social login docs here because I really liked how they kind of described it as well as the benefits. So here, as it says, social login is an open standard for authentication that allows users to log into one website or application using their credentials from another website or application. It allows users to grant third-party access for applications to their online accounts without sharing their passwords. So, for example, when you go to a website and you see login with Google or login with Facebook or login with GitHub or whatever, what that web application is doing is it's basically using your credentials from GitHub or Facebook or whatever it's, log in with X company. It's using your credentials from that other application to say that you are who you say you are, to authenticate you. So it's just a way of, really providing a better kind of user experience. So you don't need to create all these different accounts all over the web. And I'm sure that you've used this before. Like, I know I use like sign in with Google or sign in with Apple for a ton of different products, and it prevents me to having to continuously, use the same password for everything across the board and all that stuff. So that's what we're kind of trying to do here. And it also says OAuth is commonly used for things like logging into a social media account from a third-party app. It's a secure and convenient way to authenticate users and share information between applications. And I already kind of touched on the benefits here a little bit, but basically you have improved user experience because they can register and log into your application with existing accounts. So this is faster, more convenient. They don't have to, keep typing in their passwords and stuff like that. Better user management. You can access additional data and insights about users, such as interests, demographics, social connections. This can help you tailor your content and marketing efforts and increase security. Social logging can improve the security of your app by leveraging the security measures and authentication protocols of the social media platforms that the users are logging in with. So, let's be honest here. If I'm just creating my own product from scratch, do I really think that I'm going to be able to, necessarily handle every nuance of authentication better than the team at Google or Apple? Maybe not necessarily. Now, I'm sure those companies have stuff fall through the cracks, and I would probably use a platform like Supabase to do by authentication, which they handle a lot of stuff for you. But there is that benefit as well. So that's kind of what we're talking about when I say social login, as well as, some of the benefits of it. Now, as you can see on Supabase, you can have social login with a ton of different supported providers. So you have Google, Apple, Microsoft, GitHub, Twitter or X, Figma, Spotify, all these different, platforms, to where if a user already has an account on any of these platforms, they can just do sign in with Spotify or Google or Apple and use that within your application. So let's now move over to VS Code and actually talk about how we can actually implement this within our application so a user can sign in with Google or Apple or one of these other platforms. And luckily for us, it's actually really easy to do when using Supabase. So to also be clear, we are going to create a Supabase project and do this as well. So what I want to do first here is I just want to create a kind of demo application with Next.js, just a starter template that we can add this social login to. And I'm thinking that we'll just do a login with GitHub. But, if you're doing login with Google or Twitter or Spotify, you're going to follow a very similar process for all these. So if you learn how to do one, it's going to be a very similar process for all the other ones. So we're going to do mpx create hyphen next hyphen app at latest. And then I'm going to name this social auth. We're not going to use TypeScript, no ESLint. I am going to use Tailwind. You could probably do this without any styles whatsoever because we're not really going to focus on that. But I'm going to make this like look somewhat okay. And it's just very much so going to be somewhat okay. It's not going to look great, but I'm going to use Tailwind to do that. No SRC. We are going to use the app router. We're not going to customize the default import alias. So this is going to finish creating here, and then I'm going to go File, Open, then open this project within VS Code. So I just opened this new project here. I'm going to close this welcome page, and the first thing that we're going to do is actually head over to GitHub because we need to create an OAuth app on GitHub, and then we also need to create a project in Supabase, connects those two things, and then add the code to actually allow someone to log in. So let's come back here. And I'm at github.com right now. I am logged into my account. And what we're going to do is up here on the top right, I'm going to click on my icon, and then I'm going to go to settings. And then now that I'm at settings, I'm going to scroll down to the left, and I'm going to go to developer settings. I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to click on OAuth apps. You can see I have a test social login because usually for these tutorials, I create them ahead of time and make sure that everything works. So once we have our OAuth apps here, we are not going to create it just yet. I just want you to click on this because before we do a new OAuth app, we need to create our Supabase project. So let's head over to supabase.com, and I'm at /dashboard/projects. If you don't have a Supabase account, you can go ahead and create a free one. And then once you create a Supabase, just a free account, come to supabase.com /dashboard/projects. And then here, I'm going to go new project, and I'm going to choose my Code Ryan Solomon organization. It's going to load this up here. I'm going to just name it social-auth. And then for a password, I'm going to just type in a password here. And then region looks fine. You can select a region that is closest to you. And I'm going to create my new project. Now I'm going to delete this project after this tutorial because I'm going to share all of my authentication keys and stuff like that. But we're still going to use .env files to make sure everything's nice and protected as well. So you can see it's setting up this project here. So now that this is created here, what we're going to do is connect our project to VS Code. So we're going to come back here, and in the root directory, I'm going to add a new file, and it's going to be a .env.local file. So make sure this is on the same level as your app, your JS config, your next config. It should not be within your app directory. And we're going to add two environment variables here. We're going to add our next _ public _ Supabase _ URL. And then we're also going to set a next public Supabase, but it's going to be anon key, like so. And then I'm going to head back to Supabase here, and I need to grab this project URL. I'm going to copy this, head back, paste it as my Supabase URL, and then we're going to grab this API key, this anon public key. I'm going to copy this and then paste this here as well. So we're pasting this in our .env file, and it's important to use the .env file stuff for this stuff because you don't want to push these secrets up to GitHub because that's public information, or it makes this public information, and you want to make sure this is private so you have proper security measures in your application and someone can't just go and use it. I'm sharing these right now via a YouTube video, so of course I'm going to delete this project to make sure no one can do anything malicious. So make sure to put those in your .env.local file. But now that we have that, what we want to do is we want to go to authentication here over on the left. And then we want to click on providers over here on the left as well. And we want to come down to GitHub. And what we're going to do is we're going to enable GitHub. And I also want you to copy this callback URL. So it says callback URL for OAuth or social login. We're going to copy this. Now, eventually we're going to add a client ID as well as a client secret, but we're going to do that in just a second. So now let's come back to our OAuth apps here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new OAuth app. And I'm going to just name mine social-login. Our homepage URL, well, we're going to just be doing our development at localhost 3000. So this is going to be http://localhost:3000. Now, if your homepage URL was different, like after deploying your web application, you would of course need to change this. But for development purposes, we're just going to keep it as localhost 3000 right now. And then as you can see, we need to authorize a callback URL. So we are going to paste this URL that we copied right here from Supabase. So this is effectively connecting Supabase to GitHub here. Well, at least it's one step to do that. And I'm going to click register application. But now that we have this application registered, we need to then use this client ID as well as we need to create a secret. So I'm going to copy this client ID here, copy this, come back, paste it in this client ID within Supabase for GitHub. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to generate a new client secret. It's making me type in my password to do this. So I'm going to type my password in, and then we have this client secret generated. I'm going to click copy, come back, paste it in here, and now I'm going to hit save. And then what you should see within your providers is that GitHub is now enabled. So we have now effectively connected GitHub to Supabase, and we're now ready, after just those two steps, to now add the code for having our social login. So let's come back here, and let's first, just so I don't forget, I'm going to run npm run dev to just run our project here on localhost 3000. And then if we go to localhost 3000 here, we should just see our starter project, and we do see that. But all we're going to do here is we really just need to go to our page.js file and write a little bit of code that is going to allow our user to log in as well as log out. We'll do log in and log out with GitHub. So here within our app directory, let's go to our page.js file. All we're going to do here is adjust this a little bit. So first off, we can remove basically everything here, and I'm going to just take all this out. And right now we're just going to return an empty div, but we're going to add some code here at the top. So right off the top, this is going to be a client component. So we're going to go use client. And if this was in the context of a full application, I would probably make this sign in with GitHub its own client component. And I wouldn't make this entire page a client component, but for the sake of demonstration, we're just going to do that here. And I also forgot that we're going to need to install a couple of Supabase packages here. And those packages, we're going to open a new terminal, and I'm going to run npm install at supabase/ssr and at supabase/supabase.js. So we need to install those two packages. And now we should be good to go here. So I'm going to close this terminal. We're going to come back, and I'm going to import, and then we're going to import create browser client from Supabase SSR. And then after importing this, below this, we're going to now create our Supabase connection. So I'm going to say const Supabase is equal to create browser client. And then we're going to call this, and the arguments we're going to pass in are going to be process.env, and it's going to be coming to our env file. And scooching over here, it's going to be our next public Supabase URL is going to be our first argument. And then our second argument is going to be process.env. And then it's going to be our anon key. So I'm going to copy this, paste it. So it's going to be our .env URL as well as anon key. And then once we have this in place, we can create our sign in with GitHub function. So I'm going to say async function sign in with GitHub. And this is going to say const error is equal to await supabase.auth.sign in with OAuth. We're going to call it, pass in an object, and we need to set the provider that we're going to use, and that is going to be GitHub. And then we can just do like, you can handle errors, better than this, but we're just going to do if error, we'll console.error, and then we'll pass in the error. And then that is basically all we need for our sign in function. It's super easy, like I said, but we're going to add a sign out function, and that's going to be an async function just called sign out. And then this is going to do the same thing. It's going to const error is equal to await supabase.auth.sign out. And then we can say if error, we'll console.log the error here again. So really that gives us our sign in and sign out functions. And really beyond this, we just need to add buttons to side in and side out. So let's go ahead and we're going to actually have some state here just so we can see our user. So I'm going to say const user, set user is equal to use state. And I automatically imported that from React right there. And then we're going to do a use effect hook, also importing that from React, in which we're going to have an async function called get session. And then what this is going to do is say const data is equal to await supabase.auth.getSession. And you could use something very similar to this to then get your user session elsewhere in your application, to use this elsewhere in your application, like on the server and stuff like that. Say const data dot session. If there is a session, then we are going to set our user to our data dot session dot user. Else, if that's not true, if there's not a session, then we want to make sure to set our user to null. And then we want to make sure that we call this get session function within our use effect hook. And we're going to call this on mount here. And then we can just console.log our user to get some visibility on our user. Now here for the return statement, I'm basically going to have a button for sign in and a button for sign out. Now I'm going to also have some styles here, but let's first just write out kind of the logic. So we're going to have a wrapping div. I'm going to have another div here, and let me change this to JSX so I get my code completion. So I'm going to add another div here. And then here we're going to do an H1, and I'm going to just say GitHub authentication. And then here we're going to have a button, and this button is just going to be sign in with GitHub, and its on click is going to be our sign in with GitHub function. And then right next to it, we're also just going to add a sign out button that just says sign out. And then we're going to have an on click in which we're going to pass an inline function here. And what we're going to do is we're going to await calling our sign out function. But then once that is complete, we're then going to set our user back to null. And, we kind of, and we're going to make this an async inline function. We kind of just assume that this works here. We probably should wrap this in a try catch block, but for the sake of demonstration, this is going to be just fine. And it's really not a huge deal for demonstrating this, but I would suggest that if this was an actual application, make sure to put your async requests in a try catch block. And then here we're just going to add a p tag. Then I'm basically just going to say, do we have a user? If do, say signed in. Else, if we don't have a user, then we'll say signed out. And then I'm now just going to copy and paste some styles that I already have created here from GitHub. You can, of course, do the same with my finished project here, but all the logic is the same. I just added some styles here. So if we've done everything correctly, this should now work. So let's go over to localhost 3000. Let me refresh this page, and you see sign in with GitHub, sign out, and signed out. So we're console logging the user here, and right now the user should be null. So we do see it's null, but now I'm going to click sign in with GitHub. And we see it takes me to GitHub here. It's like, do you want to authorize social login? I do want to do that. So I'm going to authorize it. And then it redirects me back to my page here, and it says signed in. And then I also have my user here, and you can see it has all of my user data. It has my email from GitHub. It has all that stuff here. And if we go back to Supabase and I go to my users within my authentication tab, you see I now have added a user. And then if I come back, I can also sign out. You see it says signed out. My user is now null. And then if I sign in again, it's just going to be a single click sign in because I've already authorized GitHub. So it doesn't need to take me to that other step. So I can click sign in with GitHub. You can see I'm signed in. I have my user, and so on and so forth. So that is how easy it is to sign a user in with GitHub using social login and OAuth. If you want to add this to Next.js for other providers, you definitely can. It's super easy to do, especially using Supabase. It is very similar to the process that we just followed for our sign in with GitHub. So hopefully this gives you a good idea on how to use social login within Next.js, especially using Supabase. But really, if you use other kind of platforms, it's going to be a very similar process. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully you learned a bunch from this video, and I will catch you in that next one.